I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Tuesday, January the 15th. Rain, snow, and ice over the weekend, and I tell you what, probably a little bit worse than what was advertised. They talked about some storms earlier in the year that didn't really pan out, but this one, a lot of moisture in that thing. And I tell you what, in this El Nino year, we're just seeing those storms take a lower trek and covering more of the southern plains areas, still the Midwest, but the lower Midwest, Kansas, Missouri, places like that. Not up in the northern plains so much, but we did see significant moisture in spots in parts of Kansas, parts of Nebraska, parts of Iowa, most of Missouri, on out to Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, all out there. They've got Eastern Corn Belt feeders out that way, and just pretty significant. And it was widespread, but real spotty where the heavy measurements of moisture were. But like normal, it's going to hurt the feeder cattle market and help the fat cattle market. You wonder how it helps the fat cattle market. Well, it pulls weight off of those cattle, and it's all about tonnage when you're talking about fat cattle, and those cattle are struggling in the mud in those lots, and it pulls the weight off of them. It lowers their yield and all that kind of thing, which just means less tonnage all the time. But let's look at how it affected it here early in the week. Look at the board on Monday, February live cattle futures up 45 cents. Now this is the time where normally your traders are rolling over and they're getting out of your nearbys and going back to the later months. And to see this storm come in and actually prop up the nearbys, which they were propped up at the end of last week, if you remember, in anticipation of the storm. And so that's just a real strong showing there, because normally at this time in the game you would see your nearbys down and then your further outs higher as they were getting out of the nearbys and rolling their positions back to later months, just to stay away from the threat of delivery. But February live cattle up 45 cents at 125.42. April was up 30 cents at 126.67, and then the rest of all of your traded months were lower, slightly lower, not bad. January feeder cattle down 127. They're not getting helped by anything there. That was all weather right there. Down $1.27 at 144.85. March feeder cattle contracts down 50 cents at 144.40. Now look at the weighted average on last week's fat cattle trade, which was not a very healthy volume. Only 62,700 head in your 5-area feeding region. That compares to 101,700 a week ago and 93,400 the same week a year ago. So a lot less than what we'd normally see for this week, which could actually help the market again. Now I realize there's some guys that need to sell some cattle, but evidently they weren't too aggressive to sell them, or they sold them last week. But probably more to do with the weather. They knew that those cattle were going to kind of be sapped after this storm come through, and then they might want to take delivery of them after they were kind of pulled down. But we got another big storm coming the end of this week, and it's likely going to be as bad or worse in many of the same areas as last weekend's storm. So we've got that to look forward to. But on your live cattle sales, most all of them at 124, which was a buck higher compared to the previous week. Your live steer weighted average in the 5-area feeding region, 123.71, which was actually $1.16 higher than the weighted average from the previous week. Now your dress sales, $2 higher than the previous week at 197. Pretty good showing there. Dress steer weighted average at 196.78. That was up $2.14. So it was pretty level right along there. Most everybody at 124 and 197. And we saw similar trends in your straight up market as we did on your weighted average. So that's pretty good. But it wasn't just the northern plains or the southern plains that was light or heavy. Everybody was equally light. And so that kind of kept things pretty constant there. Nationwide, they only sold 78,900 head negotiated cash last week, with 27% of those for the 2 to 4 week delivery. Let's look at some of your feeder cattle markets. Your real-time index on Cattle Market Central on Monday late 143.56, down 14 cents, and it hasn't fallen out of bed since we went back to full speed work the beginning of last week, but it's just been steadily lower and lower and lower, and that's just moderate demand. And most all your auction sales quoting moderate demand. Just yeah, they kind of want some, but they really aren't going to get in there and fight for them because of the lot conditions and pretty much everywhere. But down here where I'm at in the Texas Panhandle feeding region, everybody's struggling with the mud. Down here it's dry as a bone, but we're over 90% corporate feeders, so we're not pushing real hard in the sales right now anyway. But the real-time index at 143.56, down 14, just been steadily lower. You look at your CME cash feeder cattle index. Of course, it's always for the previous day, so it's still sitting on Friday at 144.65. If you look back over the last week or two, your real-time index has just been right ahead of it, but it's been falling pretty much at the same rate. And if you want to have an idea what it's going to do to that current feeder cattle spot contract, whenever they get rid of all the flags, the fleshies, the fulls, and all that kind of thing, whenever it finally, they've already enacted that, but it goes to the furthest out month. Whenever that rises to the top, it's going to be pretty much just about what your real-time index is, because we quote all the cattle and do not put any flags on them or put a grade on them. All the cattle go into the index because all the cattle are going to be fed. So, but you look at some of your big Monday sales. Oklahoma City at the Oklahoma National Stockyards, 9,200 head there, and kind of a tough call on a big market there, but you could just see the biggest thing that stuck out to me was demand was just moderate all the way through, mostly due to the weather. And but it was tough on your feeder steers. They'd been cranking right along here at the beginning of the year, especially at Oklahoma City there, but feeder steers on Monday, $2 to $6 lower. You saw those guys just kind of sit back in their chairs and weren't up on the edge pushing on them anymore. Feeder heifers actually steadied to $3 higher, except for your most popular weights of 650 to 750 pound heifer calves, feeder calves, steady to $3 lower. Steer calves, lighter weight stocker type steer calves, are unevenly steady. Lightweight heifer calves mostly $1 to $6 lower. So was not a ball of fire there at Oklahoma City, which is normally pretty much dominated by your corporate feeders there. But we did see one individual quote that was pretty darn good out of National Livestock Commission there on Cattle Market Central. We saw 80 head of 676 pound steers at 148.50. That's pretty impressive, and that's good for anywhere. But Joplin Regional Stockyard, 6,800 head there. They were struggling with wet conditions, the rain, the ice, some snow all around through the weekend there, sitting right on I-44 going up there towards St. Louis. I saw where it was shut down several different times due to wrecks and the icy conditions, and just not lovely there. But those steers and heifers weighing under 600 pounds were about steady, Rick Huffman said, and then over 600 pounds, your feeder calves, $2 to $5 lower. So kind of similar type markets there. One market, I tell you what, where you could see that the buyers and the sellers both ain't scared, in Russell, Iowa. Russell Livestock Market, 5,000 head on a Monday, and I tell you what, they had about a foot of snow in that area. South central Iowa up there, and and you saw those farmer producers up there, the diversified that raise cattle and grain both. They wanted rid of those cattle. They've had them long enough, but to get rid of those cattle in those kind of conditions, you have to work when conditions are not ideal. So instead of wearing chinks and spurs and all that kind of stuff, they know why God invented coveralls and knee-high muck boots. And that's what they did. They got in there. In some cases, I'm sure they had to use tractors to either pull their pickups and trailers to the road or whatever they needed to do. But they got the cattle out of there. They've learned to live in those kind of conditions. I used to live up in that area, and that's what you do. You can't sit around in January waiting for the weather to get better, because it's not going to get better till April. But Russell Livestock, steers there compared to last week. Don't look at the Federal State Market Report. They hadn't covered the sale in a month. Steers steady to firm. Heifers $2 to $4 lower, but I tell you what, that's not bad in a market where nobody really wants one, because a lot of lots are still pretty full, and just the terrible muddy lot conditions, and places that were starting to dry out just a little bit and were ready to take some more cattle on are now said to be muddier than ever. So, you know, that's terrible. But pulled the whole market report on Cattle Market Central here for you to look at. Look at the popular steer weights. 1,062 head of steer calves in the sixes, average 652 at 157.23. Pretty impressive average. That's on all the steers. 653 head of seven weight steer calves, average 747 at 145.64. Look at the heifers now. 760 head of five weight heifers, average 554 at 143.07. And 816 head of six weight heifers, average 644 at 139.49. Pulled a couple of individual quotes out of there that if those averages didn't raise your eyebrows, these individual quotes will. 94 head of 619 pound steers bring $170 even. And look at these big cattle here. 64 head of big 887 pound steers bring $145.60 in Russell, Iowa. That's your feeder flash for Tuesday.